is James, and this is the Sleep Pod. Every episode, I make up calming and meandering stories that are mildly amusing enough to distract, but boring enough to encourage your brain to let you fall asleep. For this week's story, the random word of inspiration has been sent in by someone claiming to be me from the future, and the fate of humanity rests on me making up a story with a vague connection to candles. So get yourself comfortable. Reduce the brightness of your lights by 70%. Stop trying to think of a third item for this part of the podcast, and I'll begin with this week's story. Candles. The business meeting had been going on for hours. Mrs. Randall, the boss of Randall's Candles, was livid. She paced around her office, pointing to a screen displaying a PowerPoint presentation. A PowerPoint presentation which indicated a significant slump in sales figures over the last 2 years. Sat on an uncomfortable chair was Mrs. Randall's favorite employee, a woman by the name of Margola Shinpoint. Margola had been working at Randall's Candles for the majority of her adult life. After leaving university, where she studied business, Margola first got a job at Hugh's Shoes. She liked that job. She understood shoes. The whole concept of shoes was fairly straightforward to Margola. After all, shoes are just things that you put your feet into. But after getting headhunted by Mrs. Randall of Randall's Candles, she realized that the whole candle business was a much more complicated endeavor. Mrs. Randall had finished stomping around her office and had slumped into her expensive executive office chair. "Margola," she said, "I don't know what to do. It seems to me like people just aren't interested in candles anymore. People just don't like the smell of roses and vanilla and gingerbread and birthday cake. You know, all of these standard scents for candles." Margola nodded. She had been aware for a while that sales figures had been plummeting. Despite an extensive advertising campaign which involved paying celebrities to talk at great lengths about how much they enjoyed the smell of Randall's candles, but it just didn't seem to help. Margola took a deep breath. "Well," she said, "perhaps we need to find a new smell." Mrs. Randall looked up and stared at Margola right in the eyes. "A new smell? I don't understand. We have a wide range of flowers, of baked good aromas, of abstract concepts which are somehow given an aroma. I don't think there are any new smells that would make a good candle." Margola did not know how to respond to that. So she didn't. She just sat and watched Mrs. Randall, who was clearly deep in thought. After a few moments, Mrs. Randall reclined in her chair, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. "Okay, Margola, are you sure you can't think of a better solution?" Margola tried to think of a better solution, but she couldn't. The way she saw it, if people wanted their houses to smell like flowers or cookies, they would just grow some flowers or bake some cookies. All the novelty scents were just that, just novelty. And novelty always wears off eventually. "I think it's the only way," said Margola. "We need to find the next big thing in candle smell technology." Said Mrs. Randall. "Our research and development department have been trying to find something new for years, and all they come up with is variations of the same kind of thing. I think you are right. This is the only way." Margola nodded. "Yes, I am very confident that this is the only solution to this specific problem." Mrs. Randall thought again for another few moments. "Okay, Margola, I want you to go and find a new aroma, something new, something fascinating, and something that, if it is a bit of a novelty, then at least hopefully it will buy us a bit of time. And you never know, by then it could be boom time for the candle industry once again." "Okay," said Margola. She wasn't very happy about having to do this job. Finding a new scent sounded like complicated, hard work. But what choice did she have? "By the way," said Mrs. Randall, "if you don't find anything, if you don't discover the next big thing in candles, I'm afraid you will be fired. It's nothing personal, but we will not be able to afford your salary without some dramatic breakthrough in our business." "Oh no," said Margola. "Oh yes," said Mrs. Randall. "You've been in the candle game for long enough. You know how cutthroat this industry is. It's not an ideal solution, but hopefully it'll give you the encouragement and drive to succeed in this task." Margola sighed. "Okay," she said. "Great," said Mrs. Randall, and clapped her hands together. "Off you go then." And she pressed a button on her desk, which opened the doors to her office. Margola turned to look at the door, then back to Mrs. Randall, who was just sat there. So she shrugged, stood up, and left the office. At her desk, Margola browsed the internet, trying to find some stem of inspiration that she could follow. She did a lot of searching and started writing a list of all the different types of smells. There were sweet smells, flowery smells, naturey smells like trees and woodland and moss. There was fruity smells like oranges and pineapples. And there were slightly more interesting smells, such as freshly washed cotton, which, when she really thought about it, just smelt of washing powder. She sat at her desk for 1 hour and 30 minutes, looking at the list, reading through it, adding a few words here and there, expanding the definitions, hoping some inspiration would just burst from wherever it is that ideas originate. But it didn't happen. All she had was a list of smells and flavors, which were already well-trodden ground in the candle sector. She sighed. This wasn't getting her anywhere. She needed a new plan. She looked around her, trying to find something, anything. Her seat was made of faux leather, and leather wasn't an unpleasant smell, and she wondered if faux leather smelt different to actual leather. She got off her chair, turned around to face it, and buried her face in the back of the chair, taking in a deep breath through her nose. She thought. It smells like a chair, but I need to compare it to actual leather. She searched around the office trying to find something, anything that was made of leather. Unfortunately, all of her colleagues also had chairs made of synthetic materials. And she didn't think that shoes would be a suitable comparison due to the whole feet proximity issue. She walked over to her window. Her office had quite a large and wide and tall window that gave quite impressive views of the city. Far down below her, she could see people and cars going about their day-to-day lives. And Margola thought, I wonder what all of this smells like. And then she realized she didn't have to wonder. She could find out. So she grabbed her jacket, made her way to the stairs in the building, and step by step, floor by floor, she descended from the 34th floor all the way down to ground level. About halfway down, she paused, took in a deep breath, tested the air to see if the stairwell had an interesting and unique aroma. It didn't. Once outside, she found herself outside the building. People walked past her. Cars drove down the road. There was noise. There was sensations. And yes, there were smells. She stood in the center of the footpath, allowing the crowds of pedestrians to walk past her, walk towards her, walk by her, walk near her, and walk away from her. The whole time, she just stood there, eyes closed, all of her concentration going to the smell receptors in her nose, trying to identify, pinpoint, and judge every aroma that found its way into her vicinity. She could smell random people's perfumes and aftershaves. She could smell car exhaust fumes. Somebody was smoking a cigarette, and she smelt that. A man walked past her carrying a large stack of newspapers. She could smell the newspapers. She hadn't noticed that newspapers have a distinct aroma before, but she knew now. And she also knew that the man who was carrying the newspapers had awful body odor. She considered a moment on the possibility of proposing that Randall's Candles should sell candles that smelt like Smelly Man and newspapers. And while it would be quite a novelty, which could potentially get a bit of interest if it's a slow news day, she didn't think that that particular smell would have the longevity required for this specific task. She could smell wet dog. She wondered if any other animals have a specific smell when wet, but decided she probably didn't have enough time to carry out extensive testing in regards to that. Maybe wet squirrels smell amazing, but nobody's noticed before. But she did not have time. And anyway, would making a load of normally dry animals wet count as animal testing? If she did this, would animal rights groups start protesting Randall's Candles? She wasn't sure, but she did know that all of that would be way too much work for the short time period that she had. After 15 minutes of standing there and smelling every possible smell that she could, she decided she needed to do some walking, see if she could seek out any new smells. So she headed along the row of buildings that her office was on towards some other rows of buildings. The whole time, her nose firmly in the air, breathing in and breathing out. Sometimes she did short, sharp intakes of air. Other times, she did more longer inhales. She wasn't sure which technique was giving her the best results, so she decided to constantly fluctuate between the two options. After all, she thought, it's probably safer than just doing a medium inhale length in case there's something that she missed, and that way she would be covering all bases. She walked past a bakery and looked through the window at all the different baked goods that they had on sale, the majority of which were already odours that were sold by Randall's Candles. Cupcakes, donuts, muffins, pies, Danish pastries, cronuts. There wasn't really anything new, nothing exciting, nothing that wasn't already very similar to something that was already well established on the market. Next, there was a butcher's. 6 months ago, Margola had already pitched the idea of bacon-scented candles and they had performed fairly well. She wondered if there was any other meat products that could be suitably translated into candle form. She inquired at the butcher's if she would be allowed to smell the meat. The butcher was confused and decided to chat with his colleagues on whether they should allow her to do this, because it was a bit weird. And after a short period of deliberation, decided to allow her to smell the meat, as long as she ensured to only breathe in and never out near the meat, to not touch the meat, and to basically make sure the meat was still sellable. She thanked them and began smelling all of the meat. After a short period of time, Margola decided that the smell of raw steaks, pork chops, chicken, turkey, gammon, mince, and duck was not very appealing. It might be okay cooked, but as it was, raw meat was not a fertile ground for the discovery of nice smells. She thanked the butcher and left. The next shop was a candlestick maker's. She thought. She couldn't really steal the sense of a competitor, but she wondered, what did unscented candle smell like? So she entered the shop, picked up a nearby waxy cylinder, and gave it a big old sniff. She thought, no. Perhaps a synthetic version of candle wax smell may be okay, but it would need a lot of work and tweaking to make it interesting. She returned the candle that she'd picked up back onto the shelf and ran out of the shop in case anybody recognized her. Once outside, she did not stop running. She ran down road after road, street after street, alleyway after alleyway, smelling everything. All of the smells of a busy city had at some point over the last 2 hours made their way into Margola's nostrils. And none of it was that good. Eventually, she stopped running. She opened her eyes for the first time in a while and was very pleased with herself that navigating a busy city exclusively using her sense of smell hadn't ended in total disaster. She looked around. There was a footpath, trees, grass, bushes and shrubs, people on bicycles, people on rollerblades, people on skateboards, people on electric scooters, people walking animals, somebody walking a ferret. She briefly wondered if she should inquire with the ferret owner what the ferret smells like when damp, but decided against it because she didn't want to give strangers the wrong impression of her. She looked around desperately, trying to find something, anything. She looked up. The sky. She thought, what does the sky smell like? But she was not tall enough to find out in any meaningful way. There were some birds. She wondered what birds smelled like. But she was fairly confident that they didn't smell that nice. She span around, her eyes darting from object to thing to person, trying to find anything. But everywhere she looked, she was confident that the smell probably was horrible, or it already existed and wouldn't be that much of a new product. After 12 minutes of doing this, she realized that she was quite dizzy. So she decided to lie down on the grass. At first, she was on her back, looking up into the sky. Her whole reality still spinning from the extended session of revolving on the spot. She rolled over, so she was on her front, her face pressed against the dirt. And just when she was thinking, I don't know what to do, I can't find anything, she just happened to sniff. And there it was. There was something new, something exciting. She took another smell, this time deeper, longer, trying to pinpoint the precise location of that specific scent. She sat up a little bit, looked at the grass and the dirt below her. She thought, moved around a little bit, until directly below her it was all dirt. She lowered her face until it was about an inch away from the surface and sniffed. Her eyes went wide. That's it, she thought. She shot up, grabbed her phone out of her pocket, and called Mrs. Randall. After a few rings, Mrs. Randall answered her phone. "Hello," said Mrs. Randall. "This is Mrs. Randall. Who am I speaking to? And how did you get this number? Margola said, "Hello, Mrs. Randall. It's me, Margola Shinpoint. And I have this number because I work for you." "Yes, Margola. I know," said Mrs. Randall. "What do you want?" Margola took a deep breath. "I found it," she said. "I've found the new scent. And that scent is dirt." There was silence as Mrs. Randall thought long and hard about this. "I love it," she said. "Get back here and we'll start work on this right away." And she hung up the phone. "Yes," said Margola, jumping up and punching the air. The other people in the park looked at her and shrugged, and then watched her as she ran off down the road, back to her office. That's the end of this week's story. Next time somebody complains to you about them not being able to get to sleep, why not recommend the Sleep Pod? Or don't. It's totally up to you. Anyway, until next time, thanks for listening, and good night.